Hey guys, Pascal here. On this week's episode, we're introducing you to our two newest reporters, Daisy Zavala Magaña and freelancer Daniel Walters. They talked about their hopes, goals, and values in journalism, plus some previous stories they've covered. You can find relevant articles, other podcast episodes, and more on our website, rangemedia.co. Thanks for listening, and on to the show.
You're listening to KYRS Medical Lake Spokane. This is Free Range, a co-production of KYRS and Range Media. This is Aaron H. here today, and the rest of the people that you know at Range are out of the office. They're doing other Range stuff, but this show is actually pretty special because we get to introduce y'all to some new folks who are going to be writing for Range. First, we have a new staff reporter, Daisy Zavala Magaña. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you got it.
I got it. Oh, that's great. And Daniel Walters, who's kind of like a long-time Spokane journalist, has a lot of institutional knowledge. He's going to be doing some freelance for us.
Yeah, minimum. We'll see. We'll hope. I have hopes and schemes to but I like to do it as work for Range as much as possible. So we're going to see how we can make it work and what kind of things we can figure out there. But I freelance at this point. Yeah.
And you both just left full-time reporting gigs at other publications. Daisy, you were at the Nogales International. I don't know if I'm supposed to say it with an accent or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole deal. It's bilingual.
Yeah,
so
which is
totally
it's a border community on the border between Arizona and Mexico, Sonora, right?
Yeah, Sonora.
And Daniel was previously at Investigate West, which is
which you do say with an accent, actually. Yeah,
Investigate.
Yes, yeah.
Great.
Trying
to be culturally sensitive.
Yeah.
Daisy is our bilingual reporter. She's going to be able to go out into Hispanic communities and communicate in ways that the rest of us at Range have not been able to because none of us are fluent in Spanish. We're really excited about that. Range has been trying to hire a Spanish language reporter for a long time now, and I think your articles, you're going to translate them into Spanish so that our Hispanic readership can access it on a better level. Do I have all that right?
Yes. Well, I don't want to promise certain looks yet.
Okay.
We're still trying to hash out details, but yeah, the goal is to connect with our Spanish-speaking communities here, and then offer some articles in Spanish. But we're still trying to fine-tune details for which exactly we would be translating and at what point, because everybody else also does a lot of work that I think would be beneficial for the community to also be able to read in Spanish. So yeah, basically I'm here, I speak Spanish, reach out to me. We're still fine-tuning details.
Yeah, and at Range we're also going through some other changes. We recently migrated our website to a new a new back end, which is giving us trouble, and so there might be some hitches in how we move forward with things. But once we have all this new stuff up and running, I think we're gonna put out some really good journalism. We're really excited. Like I said, we're really excited to have Daisy. I'm really excited to have Daniel. He's got a ton of institutional knowledge about beats that I cover, including the Christian nationalists, right-wing extremism communities. And so, yeah, welcome. We're so glad to have you guys here. Thanks for joining me on the radio today.
Yeah, no, I'm truly excited. To kind of the old feeling of being stoked about journalism and kind of that the romance of journalism has kind of returned for me just the last couple of days. So it's I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I also feel newly inspired and refreshed. I think it happens whenever we get someplace new and.
Yeah. It's always good to have kind of a fresh start. How are you dealing with the cold, Daisy?
It's been really hard, but I will say it has been really beautiful too. I got here about a week or two ago, and it was very foggy in the evenings, and I just haven't seen that in almost 3 years. I got to see a little bit of snow in Sonora last winter, but it didn't stick around. It was gone in like 3 hours.
Yeah.
So it's a welcome sight for sure.
Okay. Well, I think part of the purpose of why we wanted to talk today is, we want to talk about a little bit about your backgrounds, some of the stories you've covered in the past, and kind of what your hopes are for writing for Range while you're here, what kinds of stories you want to write. And I was hoping that we could just kind of zoom out at first, and we can start with Daisy. How did you... And you posted a kind of introduction article. Daniel's got one forthcoming, talking about how you got into journalism. But can you just kind of tell me that story? How did you come to journalism? You're originally from, I think you were born in Wenatchee. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I grew up watching a lot of documentaries, but I do not make documentaries. I actually started as an anthropology major in college, and then halfway through I took a class. It was like a Journalism 101. It was an intro class, but I really liked the way that they were describing the ways in which journalism can hold powerful people accountable, foster empathy and connection through community stories, and just really give people in the communities whatever they need to make the best decisions for themselves, whether it's, politics or joining whatever community organization that's local to them. The way that we're able to just highlight certain stories and people, I think really spoke to me, because it was cultural anthropology also, by the way. So it kind of fell a little in line. There were similarities, I will say.
Between cultural anthropology and journalism?
Yeah, a lot of very big differences, too, in the way that things are done, or ethics, I suppose. But, yeah, I don't know. I figured, I don't know if I want to get my PhD in cultural anthropology, so that seemed like a way to continue writing and meeting people and all of that.
Okay. And this was at WSU in Pullman, right?
Yeah, Pullman.
Okay, yeah. And okay, so you kind of go from cultural anthropology and you switch. I guess you probably switched majors, right?
Yeah, I did.
And you got, did you write for the paper down there? I know you did internships at the Spokesman, right?
I did, yeah. I also, when I took that class and I changed majors, I immediately applied to the student paper to kind of see how it was going to work out, and I also enjoyed it a lot. And it was through my journalism classes that I got connected, that a professor told me about the Spokesman Review internship to cover the legislature. And so I did that in 2020. I think it was 2020. I don't know, all the years kind of bleed into each other.
And that was a mess of time, 2020, the pandemic, and yeah.
Yeah, and I graduated the next year, so didn't get to walk the stage. I don't know.
Well, and when so you did your internships with the Spokesman, you graduate, you go work for the Seattle Times for a little while, and I've looked at some of your pieces that you did there. A lot of labor reporting focused on migrant communities, and then what year did you go to Nogales?
That would have been October 2023.
Okay, so about 2.5 years ago, kind of. Okay.
Yeah, and I got an internship there for the summer, stuck around as a temp, and then was the evening breaking news reporter, which is a really, really tough gig.
Why is it tough?
I was working 2 to 10, and by 5 p.m. everybody's gone. So I was working in basically an empty newsroom with nobody before we experienced that, with the pandemic. Or no, it was after, but I guess everybody got to return, and then I was still stuck there, is how I would describe it.
The awkward transition out of the pandemic.
That never happened for me, because those were my hours, just when everybody was gone. And it was monitoring crime in courts in King County, and then sometimes Pierce County. And it's just so brutal to have to read through just those court documents.
Yeah.
And then feel like you're a floating reporter. And then so in my free time, I really tried to do a lot of enterprise also outside of that. But eventually I just felt like it was wearing me down, and I really wanted to cover immigration. Mm-hmm. So I saw a posting, actually, funny enough, there's this Facebook group for Latinas in journalism, and you kind of just network or complain or, share opportunities. And the managing editor posted about the job in Nogales. And so I applied, and long story short, got there and spent a little over 2 years at the border. Okay.
And what made you want to come back to Spokane?
Luke, founder of Range, called me up and said that they had finally gotten funding for this position. And he offered me the role, and I just, I really felt connected to the mission and the focus for this position, because it's what I've been trying to do since I was a student, since I was an intern, kind of fill in those gaps, because we do have big Spanish-speaking communities and in pockets of immigrant communities throughout the state, not just, centered in one region. Our region obviously has a large population, but really throughout the state, it's just the immigrant populations have been growing. Yeah.
And so, and notably, Daisy did some really great reporting for Range, and that's kind of, I think that's how you knew Luke, is through working on a couple of bigger enterprise pieces that you did for us. Well, yeah, we're stoked that you're here. And Daniel, Daniel is a true blue local to Spokane. You were born here, right?
Yeah, no, 39 Holy Family Hospital, almost 40 years ago. So
almost 40 years ago. And so you've been in the community for a long time. You know all the stories. I think the only other person on the Range team who has like the same kind of level of institutional knowledge about the local communities as Luke.
And in fact, a decade ago, roughly a decade ago, I was working with Luke at the Inlander. Yeah. And then 2 decades ago, I was reading Luke's column in the Inlander from the Whitworth College cafeteria. And 3 decades ago, Luke was playing basketball in my parents' driveway, because he's like, his aunt and uncle effectively were like one of our next door neighbors. And so Luke and I go way back, but it's always been something that, Spokane is always something that's like flawed, but you love it. And it's kind of like, I don't know, I just love wherever I've been, whether it was Limit Elementary or Sauk Middle School, like I'm going to like latch onto that and like cheer it on and try to like make it better. And that's generally like, that's one of the reasons why I think I really love local journalism, is because I just care. I have such a heart for the community, understanding the community, understanding the people of it.
Yeah. I didn't know that you and Luke went that far, but I knew you worked at the Inlander together. But you went to Whitworth, and you were a journalism major, right?
I was communications and history. Okay. And I actually kind of argue that I think history is a better major for journalists in some ways than a journalism major, just because it's if journalism is said to be the first draft of history, and so it's useful to read the more like polished drafts of history as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you need to. Yeah. Well, just give me a. I was not a history major or a journalism major. Give me a like why is that? Why do journalists need to have a good handle on history?
I just think it's because you're understanding all of these movements, the way that movements affect and trends and people can affect the course of events effectively. And so you're looking back on, here's the progressive movement in Washington State, and how that the initiative process comes out of the progressive movement and the populist movement, and kind of how those were intertwined. And like there's a Know Nothing party and Know Nothing groups that were like anti-immigrant and making some of the very same arguments that are being made against immigration today. And so like there are all these echoes of the past in the present. There's a cliche that basically that it might have been I don't want to like misattribute this, but basically that the past isn't over, it isn't even past effectively. Like that's kind of this idea that like the past is always with us. And so I think understanding just that context, and also understanding the ways that you can see echoes of the present in the past as well. You can see ways that our personalities can be similar, and people responding in these similar ways to people now and in the past. And I don't know, I just think it's really useful to have some of that lens when approaching journalism.
Did you work for the student paper at Whitworth?
Yes, I was the opinions editor for the Whitworthian. I wrote the humor column called I call it the Unvarnished Truth. So it's a humor column. Then I ended up kind of applying for the opinions editor position. Okay. Because back then I really kind of loved like great opinion writing. I grew up in the blogging era of journalism when you had like, Ezra Klein and all these people, and there's people like talking about the Iraq War, and the Iraq War is going to be great, that kind of thing. So I remembered reading a lot of those really, powerful blogs. So I was pretty like positive about, kind of the use of like reported, opinionated journalism, but like, that's based on, reports and trying to persuade people. And so that was something I really liked to do. And I was proud of my work. And I always say that like the work you do on a student paper is always going to feel like the most important work you've ever done. Even if you go there, it's like nothing like being at a student paper and be like, we're going to hold the administration accountable. And it's a great practice, I think. And it taught me more, I think, on the student paper than any of my journalism classes.
I had a similar experience on my student paper. I still look back on those days as like, just like kind of one of the best eras in my career. And my career is kind of, it's broken in several places, but the student paper was like one of my best experiences in journalism. And so you graduate Whitworth. Do you go straight to the Inlander after that?
Yeah. So it was like you had to do an internship for it was one of the requirements, to graduate, you need an internship. So I got my internship like the summer after my last, so technically the summer after the graduation ceremony. It was like, you have to do this one thing. And so I kind of reached out to the Inlander and asked to be an intern effectively. I think the first week, I had the news lead. I just wrote something that made it the kind of the news lead, like one of the 3 or 4 stories that were in the news section that week. And then when my internship was over, I kind of describe it as sort of the reverse of Milton from Office Space, where I just decided to like not go home and just like stay there and keep working there. And eventually they kind of felt bad for me and gave me a job. And so that's generally my squatter's rights strategy of employment effectively, which has been more effective than applying for jobs. But, I tried to apply for other jobs, when I was there, like as an intern, like I think it was the Polk County Itemizer Observer in Oregon. Like I tried like these small little community paper, but I always loved the alt weekly and particularly the Inlander brand of alt weekly, which was very much like it was a little bit less like kind of intentionally like edgy and in your face and trying to be cool like the Stranger was of some alt weeklies, but it's very much like we're gonna like have voice and have personality, but we're really gonna like hammer home like the community journalism and understanding the things around us and going a little bit more in depth. And and it was just something that I really kind of glommed onto and really loved.
Yeah, the Inlander is like it's one of the few surviving alt weeklies in the country. It's it's kind of a Spokane institution that's been here for a long time.
Yeah, and in some ways we were like all the alt weeklies were trying to do these dramatic changes. We're going to pivot to video, or we're going to like pivot to like we're going to do it's all online clicks now, and it's like trying to really. But like I think Inlander's sort of comparative advantage was that it ended up kind of just like sticking to what it did well, and so for a long time it was like able to do that, and there was enough like loyal advertisers that was able to keep going for a long time. And so it's still great to see that in the people picking it up in the stands and the from the local newsstands and things like that. Though I kind of miss the ability of being able to look over and be like, did you see that article? What do you think about that article? Or like, pretty good article there, that kind of thing. So I don't know, it's just that feeling of being connected to your community like that by actually having the paper there was a big deal for me. I liked it a lot.
And you missed that because I think it was like 15 years at the Inlander. After that, you went and worked for Investigate West for a couple of years, right?
Yeah. It was through Report for America, which is a great Report for America is sort of a great program. And
the Report for America is basically like I don't know exactly like how it's organized, but it's basically they like you apply for a job there and they find you a job at a local newsroom or a local or like state level newsroom.
Yeah, and so sometimes the people go across. A lot of the people are younger people. It's almost like I've heard of Teach for America, which is trying to connect people with teaching positions, especially in kind of more like struggling areas. So it's a sort of a similar concept. I think, and the plan was always to do Investigate West, but it was that was sort of funding the position or part of the position for 3 years, and so that was kind of like how do they make it pencil effectively? And so it was like, and it was doing like democracy and extremism, which was something that I'd wrote about. I mean, I was like, I was talking to Aaron about how he sort of in some ways took over my beat covering former Representative Matt Shea and some of his shenanigans and kind of that area. And it was something I felt like I was doing at the time. I felt like I'm doing some of the best coverage of extremism in the Inland Northwest. And so this is an opportunity to do more of that and do more of that in depth and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And you focused a lot on Idaho, I think, at Investigate.
And I just was like, it was just because I was like really deeply sourced. I think I was really deeply sourced in Idaho, and I was able to like continue to produce stories and find more stories on Idaho and what was happening in Boise politics and things like that. And I always kind of had some affection for Idaho and its zaniness at times, but also like trying to find the kind of the human impact of policies there, but also just the who these people are. What are the moments where they're standing up to extremism in places that you might not expect, and all that kind of thing. And so, I love reporting on Idaho.
And now you've left Investigate West.
Yes.
And you're going to be, and I don't think anybody really knows quite yet, like what your capacity is going to be at Range. But currently, you're freelancing for us. You want to expand it.
I'm not trying to like push her at all. But I'm just like saying like, okay, let's do this. Let's do this for now and see if there's more opportunity or more just kind of opportunity to do this kind of thing. I'd love to do this long term if possible, and so that's kind of the goal. It's like, let's do freelance for a while. Let's see if I'm able to really make an impact, and then see like, hey, are there ways to, fund me through grants or through donations or whatever, like ways to make that happen is kind of my hope. But, it's like, I'm not trying to be, have any necessarily expectations, but one of the things I really like about Range is there's just a real sense of hope and optimism in a lot of ways. It seems like where there's like, okay, we're gonna make this work, and even if it's like a long shot, and like I'm all about like sometimes I feel blessed to be still doing journalism after all these years. I mean, it feels like this I'm breathing rarefied air. I'm one of the surviving people, and it's like glorious that I'm still able to do this job after so many other people have had to go into public relations or that kind of thing.
These days, journalism is difficult to stay, and there are so many like newsrooms are shrinking, newsrooms are dying, especially small local newsrooms. A lot of really great journalist careers, the floor falls out from underneath them. They have to go into PR, and I feel fortunate in the same way. Like I was out of journalism for a long time, and I got back into it somehow. Well, great. I wanted to talk a little bit about some specific stories, and Daisy, you sent. I asked Daisy and Daniel both to send me some pieces that they were proud of, and one of the stories that Daisy sent that really caught my eye was about how it's a story for Nogales International titled "Without Pathways to the United States, Migrants Request Asylum in Mexico," and it's basically about like this idea that when the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, kind of like, I mean, like, I don't think it's any secret that their first order of business was to like dramatically restrict immigration to the United States, and like they call it shutting down the border, and so but people were still needing to go places that weren't their home countries, even though many of them love their home countries. They were in situations where they just couldn't make things work, either because of physical danger or because of economic insecurity. And so you had all these people who would come up to the United States border through Mexico, and they would be eligible for this program called CBP-1 that would get them into the United States. And I'm not an expert on like all the like different like immigration statuses that afforded people, but Trump ended that program, and so a lot of the migrants got stuck at the Mexico-U.S. border, and they couldn't come in. And so they sought asylum in Mexico instead. And one of the things that really struck me about this story is I had to kind of take up a bit of the immigration beat when the Trump administration came into office locally here in Spokane, covering immigrant communities. And people would talk about CBP-1, about how difficult that program was to navigate because there's so much paperwork, so many just like bureaucratic hoops you have to jump through to just come here and try to get a job and be in a safer place, a more like productive place, a place where hopefully they can flourish. And the stories that made it to me were stories that didn't get stopped by Trump's ending of CBP-1. And so I never really had an opportunity to consider that, but you hung out with immigrants on the border. And one of the things that you talked about when kind of, I think it was your first or second day in the last week or so, you talked about how a lot of the stories that you ran into on the border were related to Washington in one way or another. Yeah, can you just tell? And I think like this is a good window into like how like the long tail of any one person's immigration story, like coming through often many countries, spending a lot of time often in Mexico, trying to get into the country. Like those are stories that make it up here. But yeah, what is it like on the border with the immigration system or the immigration, like everything that was happening in the news with immigration? Like how did you? What was it like covering that? Like as opposed to being in Washington the rest of your reporting career?
It was really hard.
Okay.
For a lot of different reasons. One of them being that everything changes so fast, and you see it in real time. So, like with the Biden administration in June, he severely restricted asylum as well at the border. And it was during the time where you would have families or mothers with children come up in between ports of entry. So near the wall. And their goal was to turn themselves into Border Patrol to request asylum. So that was a process that we were seeing. And then everything changed really fast. And even for us journalists, like it's hard to keep up. So when you're already in transit, you get there. And then they were being immediately deported. And so at the time, like in the first week, we were seeing like 400 or 300 daily deportations in Nogales, Sonora alone. And a lot of the families there, like all of their belongings for the most part would be thrown away. So think baby formula, think like clothes, even some documents. And when I was talking to them there, a lot of them were laying to me that they weren't given the opportunity to request asylum, which was one of the parameters under this executive order that Biden issued. They were still supposed to, these Border Patrol agents were still supposed to be screening for fear, and that was just not happening from what I heard from migrants themselves.
Screening for fear. What do you mean by that?
Like express fear of being returned to their home country if they were to be deported. So then that would kind of kickstart a process. But then, but with the whole executive order, it was like if you get a certain number of, and I can't quite recall the details, but if we were getting a certain number of people at the border, then it would completely shut down.
Wow. Okay. And so it was like these are programs, and I think this is one of the threads in the Trump administration. The whole story of immigration with the Trump administration is that there were programs in place that were totally legal, and then like the Trump administration, like Trump issued a number of executive orders that tried to shut down these legal pathways for people to get into the United States. And so people were just kind of like left in the lurch.
Yeah, like CBP
including asylum. Yeah,
CBP one, because when Biden issued that stayed, and then Trump came in, and then essentially before Trump came in on January 20th, asylum was already restricted in between ports of entry. So the real, and lawyers will frame it differently. They're the experts.
Yeah.
But from what I was seeing and what people were laying to me, and from speaking to some lawyers, it was really, really hard, almost impossible to claim asylum in the way that migrants were doing it before in between ports of entry. So the real, and I say quote unquote real, only way left was CBP 1. And then Trump came in, and then that was gone. And I met migrants there that were so confused because they had appointments that same day, or they had appointments the following day. And they'd already, if they were Mexican, they'd already, traveled through multiple states. But some of them, or the majority of them, were not Mexican migrants. Some of them were from Venezuela. So they'd already gone through the Darien Gap, through the jungle, through other countries to get there.
This is an extremely arduous journey. The Darien Gap is one of the most notorious. There's like, it's a physically, like, extremely difficult. Like you have to walk. I don't even know how far. I've read a number of stories about it, but I don't even know how. I have a hard time imagining like the scale of difficulty that people have to go through. Often traveling with small children, often traveling with no resources, often being escorted by people who had nefarious intent, and they would come to the United States with this hope that, or they would come to the border with this hope that they were going to get in, and then all of a sudden, all the pathways to get in are just like shut down. I can't imagine what that's like.
I can't either, and I did talk to migrants that had gone through that, and then not only had they, survived going through the Darien Gap, they then got into Mexico, and they told me they would at times be extorted by police or criminal groups, and migrants in Nogales, Sonora are so susceptible to criminal groups there. I think before I left, there was this instance, and it was reported on, not by me. I wasn't there at that point, but there was this shelter run by the city, and then two migrants there had left, and they got a taxi because they wanted to go grab lunch or dinner, and they were taken to I think it was a cartel or a criminal group, and they managed to escape. So that's how we know that happened. But a lot of the times they're coerced into, joining, or they're extorted for what little they have.
We need to go to our underwriting message, but we'll come back and keep talking about this for a few minutes. Let's see if I can make this board work. All right, we're back. I fumbled through two of those. That was fun. So how do you? I mean, there's and Range has covered a number of immigration stories of people who migrated to the United States before this reporting and these events that you saw on the border. How do you have thoughts about how to carry that reporting that you did down there forward up here, or how are you kind of envisioning your job as you go forward at Range?
Yeah, I mean, we have immigrant communities here. Also, there's still always ties to the border. One of them that I can think of off the top of my head is one of the biggest, or if not the biggest shelter there, the Keno Border Initiative, compiled data from deportees. And the largest group were detained in Arizona, but the second largest group was detained here in Washington.
Oh, wow.
And when I went to visit, I did, on one occasion, meet a man that had recently been deported, and he had grown up in Washington, sort of in the, I want to say, central Washington area, or maybe a little bit more eastern. And yeah, he spoke perfect English, grew up here. Like, I think a lot of the issues that a lot of people that were deported before I left were facing is that they were having trouble adjusting to the border. And part of that was the language barrier. A lot of them spoke English, or that was their preferred language. And so it was hard to kind of feel even just some sense of comfort.
Oh, wow.
There. And so, yeah, their families are here.
They're they're Americans, whether whether they're
they
like
are.
full citizens or not. They grow up here. They have community here, and they've grown up in a cultural context that doesn't necessarily translate to where they're being sent.
Yeah, and then it's just hard. I'd imagine. I mean, to the extent that I can, but yeah, I feel like there's ample opportunity to kind of explore just the stories on what that does to families, because they're separated. You know, they have family members that are on the other side, and here we're thousands. I mean, I don't know how many thousands of miles away from the border, from the U.S.-Mexico border.
I'm not sure the distance, but it's a very long way.
It's a long distance. And so, yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's that angle of it, but also just a lot of stories here about immigrant communities that have built roots here and are here. And that might look a little different, depending on, where they're coming from or why they came, if economic opportunity, asylum, refugee status, it might look different, but they're all, here building roots. So I'm excited to get to talk to people and just learn about what stories I can do.
I'm looking forward to seeing who you connect with and what stories come out of it. We kind of threw Daisy into the deep end like right away with a story about like the way the city is distributing funding for immigrant communities. And I don't think it's a scoop to just say like that's a really contentious area, and you've been navigating that with aplomb. So yeah, that's fantastic. Daniel, can we talk about? I know that like. As we've said, you're a local to Spokane. You have a lot. You know all the stories here. And one of the things that we were talking about walking across the Monroe Street Bridge on the way over here, and this kind of speaks to some of the stories that you sent me, was the idea of like, you talked about community journalism earlier, and what you said to me was this term like small stories. And two of the stories you sent me, really really interesting pieces that you. I believe both cover stories for the Inlander. One was on like a San Diego tech executive who came to Spokane to like find his son who was kind of living homeless here on the streets, and you dove into like the ways that they kind of like navigated trying to locate each other, and you have some ideas about how to follow up with that story possibly for Range, and then another one on like you wrote about these two apartment complexes in downtown that are I can't remember if they're like officially affordable housing, but they're low income housing, and
they were SRO, single room occupancy apartments. So basically, they don't have any bathrooms or anything in the actual units. You have to go out almost like a dorm situation. And for many years, that was where most of the low income housing, a century ago, most of the low income housing throughout the country would be in these kinds of facilities.
Yeah, and so just like there's a lot of just like very intimate little stories that happen to the people who are just like disadvantaged in our society, who like and particularly these 19 people had died from, I think mostly from like heat related issues,
mostly from overdoses and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But there'd been like a spat of like 3 or 4 that had died within like, I don't know, 2 or 3 days, like basically like 36 hours or something. There'd been multiple people from these apartment complexes that had died of heat exhaustion. And so I wanted to figure out, is there something that the landlord had done really wrong in terms of the building itself, like that they didn't have in the air conditioners and things like that. And I think what I found more was just the level of poverty and the level of like pain, and it was these places that weren't necessarily off the street, but for some people that wasn't necessarily better than being homeless. These locations, and I think there's that inherent tension, and I think some of my favorite stories have this inherent, sometimes almost irresolvable tension between like, okay, like this is in some ways, this is like these people are housed, and so that's good, but if the housing is so bad, is that worth it? And trying to kind of like suss out that tension. And is there a way to do it where we have the same affordability, but without the all the costs that are associated with that, including sometimes costs from other people who are sometimes mentally ill, or there's moments of violence and things like that. And so it could be a really, really hard place. And there's some real sad stories in these apartment complexes. And you can just read through, I requested police reports over 6 years for these two apartment complexes. And you can see people like the police coming in and, sorry.
Oh, no, you're all right. I was just waving at somebody out.
Okay, it's fine.
Window. Yeah, keep going.
No, just you could see the police reports talking about like sometimes you have like policemen who are better writers than police officers, better writers than others. And it's like one of them started talking about like this great eye for detail, talking about the rat. He opened it up and the rat's like skittering across his feet, and just like the I mean, there's a moment where like somebody's died and they're in this hallway trying to like talk to other people or witnesses. They knock on the door. When the knock, like they hit the door and like just like swings open and from the knock, basically pushed open from the knock, and they see this guy laying in front of the box fan. Another person has died that same night from this heat wave. And a lot of these places didn't really have air conditioners, and so it's this real real tragedy that has happened there. But I don't know. It's just like that is like sometimes you're using this investigative journalism tools like records requests and documents, things like that, like as a way to hold people and hold bad guys accountable. But sometimes it's more like sometimes there's just like human stories that come out of it rather than necessarily even just trying to like find villains. Effectively is finding the humanity and the tragedy that is associated with this. And so I think I've become, as I've aged as a journalist, I've become somewhat more interested in the human stories rather than just the let's call people out for being bad people. And so sometimes that we do that, and I love to like try to hold people accountable, but I want to understand where they're coming from too, and why they don't think they're the bad guy. Like I want to understand that too, because very few people think they're the bad guy.
Yeah, and that's one thing that's always kind of like, I've followed some of your pieces even before I came to Spokane. That's one thing that's always impressed me is like, why are these people doing what they're doing? Like let's try our best to understand even the villains that we're reporting on.
I always think that great journalism is like the center of these three different factors of empathy, outrage, and curiosity. And like, and you have to, I think you have the best journalism is balanced equally between all three of those factors. And like, if you miss one of the legs of that stool, effectively, like it ends up toppling over into activism or into gullibility or things like that,
Yeah, and that's not what we do. It reminds me of that scene from the movie The Insider, where Lowell Bergman is like yelling at the CBS executive, and or no, I think it was somebody who was working in government. He was calling him out, and he was like, the guy wasn't being like forthcoming with some information. He was like, right now you're making me angry and curious, and that's not a place that's not what you want to do to a journalist.
Yeah, no, I think that's the thing with I think there's always been a part of me that wants to like, it really, really bugs me if I don't know the answer to something. And so that's going to just like drive me crazy. And so like, for years it was like, even just like the question of, hey, why did the city administrator get pushed out at the city of Spokane? Like just trying to figure that out was like driving me mad. And so, there's always trying to like answer some of those questions. Can be a really great place for journalism to start.
But I think one of the things you've talked about a few times since you have been in the newsroom is just trying trying to examine just like smaller, intimate stories and like really diving into them in like a deep way. And I think that is going to be useful in all of our beats. Like Daisy, you're going to be working on the stories, the intimate stories of immigrants, and like how do you delve deeper into those. I'm interested in, like, my main two beats are sort of like Christian nationalism and the stories that are happening out on the West Plains. And I haven't written a lot about that lately, but I want to get back into that because there's several stories of just like individual people out there who I haven't been able, like, I just haven't made time to call them up that I need to. Yeah, just like, and I think like you talked about today you were out interviewing a person dealing with a family member's death in a death from
car accident.
From a car accident, and yeah, just like what kinds of stories are you interested in digging into? Like,
yeah, and I always want, it's not just going to be just there's always going to be some element of policy or some factor or trends or culture. So there's going to be factors that are the classic things of journalism. But I just think that, like, I don't know. I mean, I think about, like, why did people's opinions change so rapidly on gay marriage? And it wasn't because like people were putting out policy papers. It was because they knew people who came out as gay and cared about them. Sometimes it was their sons, sometimes it was family members, sometimes it was just watching Will and Grace on TV or the Simpsons episode where there's a gay guy on there. But it's like that moment of having empathy for other people and trying to understand through their lens ended up really sort of changing minds and hearts. And whatever you end up believing about what the right policy is on that, or what you're for or against, I think there was a real sense of, hey, we've got to reckon with the humanity of these people that we might think about in the abstract, and people get angry or think about them in the abstract, but you think about them in the reality. And then I think that we can do the same thing with all of these other people. And I want to do that as not only for the people that are the the immigrants and the low income people in the some of these people that are really suffering, but also I want to have some empathy for the for these decision makers, for these right wing legislators, for these I want to enter into their mindset. I mean, like, I wrote a story in Investigate West where I really did a deep dive on this guy who went from like the Proud Boys to eventually Patriot Front, which is this really big white nationalist group, to starting his own neo-Nazi chapter in Portland. And he ended up going viral because he was like brawling with some of his former Proud Boy buddies. And like, you're writing that story and he's like a really bad kind of person, but I think like you can even have empathy there where like, he loses his dad dies when he's like 9, and he's like desperate in some of these text messages we got and these chat messages, desperate for friendship and for camaraderie and for meaning. And he's like just looking for love in all the wrong places. Right. And it becomes this really human emotion, a human desire that is warped into these really evil ends. And so I think you can feel sad and sorry and want to help this guy while at the same time not pulling punches when it comes to understanding how awful his views are. And that's always been sort of like a passion for me, is to try to understand, okay, who these people see themselves. And, some people that are just like not honest with themselves are really just like truly dishonest or trying to pull one on you. I don't have a lot of sympathy for, but I'm just like not gonna, but if they're like, okay, they come by this, they come by their bigotry honestly, but I'm not gonna soft pedal their bigotry, but I want to understand where they're coming from. And there was this, right wing guy on from North Idaho that I was telling him on social media the other day, I'm like, I have empathy for you too. And he got really angry at me. He's like, oh, what are you? I was like, no, I'm serious. Like, dude, like, I want to understand where you're coming from. I want to put myself in your shoes and understand your anger and your sort of feeling that the world is slipping away and that like everyone is betraying you and all that kind of thing. Because I think that's the stuff of humanity that will create better outcomes. And mostly, like, I don't even believe our job as journalists is to create the best outcomes. I think our job is to tell the truth and understand the nuances and the reality of the world we're living in. and then other people who are the activists and are the politicians hopefully can take that and do good work with that.
This resonates with me because I spend a lot of time in far right churches, and the folks who attend them are often, they get into those communities, and your average congregant is just there for community, and they as part of would call it the devil's deal, but they're Christian churches. But the deal that they ink to get into that community is to say maybe they've come from trauma or drug addiction or abuse situations, and the church offers them. They say look, come join us. We'll pray for you. We'll create a community around you. We have resources. If you need your lawn mowed and you don't have the physical ability to do that, we'll get one of our strappy young boys to go do it for you. Where the deal that they make is potentially just giving up a part of themselves or their value systems. Maybe they previously embraced communities that the church that they joined has rules against ally. I think about this woman who goes to On Fire Ministries, Matt Shea's church, and she's kind of a rising star in that church, and she's been doing part of she helps Matt do his radio show, and he's given her something of a platform. But if you scroll back into her social media feeds, you get far back enough and you realize that she's a lesbian, and she's given up a part of, and maybe it's valuable to her, maybe it's worth the trade-off, but you see that there's a human being who has a deeper story that's very complicated. And yeah, I think that posture toward people, even people that, and obviously I'm not making any excuses for this woman's allying with that church, but it's I think you have to understand the mechanisms of why people go that route in life to be able to solve problems. And I think telling the stories is really important.
Well, there's this real campaign on the far right, but also on the left, on the we'll call it the social media left, against empathy, right? Against this idea of, they call it the right wing calls it toxic empathy, with this idea of you're trying to weaponize the fact that I could feel bad for these immigrants by, all this kind of thing. But I think I also think you see that in some ways on the social media left. It's this person is, we should be justifying violence or justifying against people that they consider to be fascists or things like that. And I think there's a real, it's okay to be really, really opposed to the belief systems, right? Or the policies or things like that. But I think you've always got to sort of understand that these are human beings, the core of it. And that's something that's a part of, that I think will animate a lot of my journalism and hopefully continue to do so. But also I don't want to ever mean that I'm not going to try to ask tough questions or hold someone accountable.
Yeah. I think it's a really good conversation. I think we've got to end it there. It's about time. Is there anything 30 seconds that y'all want to leave listeners with?
Find me online, send me story tips.
You can find Daniel and Daisy on the Range website as well as on KYRS, and you can get in touch with them through us for tips. But that's our time for this week. Free Range is a weekly news and public affairs program presented by Range Media and produced by Range Media and KYRS Community Radio, KYRS Medical Lake, Spokane.